Hey guys, how's it going? Phil here. Wanted to make this video because it's been something I've been trying to get around to for a while, but life happens, and so sometimes things get caught in the wayside. But I wanted to do an update video on the card game I was making. So about a year ago, I made a YouTube video about basically like discussing my initial thoughts when creating my own card game, addressing some of the problems that are very common in the space. So like what kind of mana generation are you going to have? What are the issues with certain, styles that are already implemented in other games? So a majority of that video focused upon the land problem in Magic the Gathering and the way that my game is going to try to attempt to solve that problem. Um, and honestly, in overall in the last like year, I haven't put a lot of effort into the game. It's still, in the back of my mind, it's something I want to do. It's something I'm actively trying to work towards a little bit, but it definitely hasn't had as much progress as I would like. But with that being said, there are definitely things that have changed in my design philosophy since last time I made a video, and people have been asking for an update, so thought I may as well go ahead and make an update. To make it so you don't have to watch the other video, if you like stumble across this, I'm going to give a brief overview of kind of how my game works and some of the systems in it. So I'm just going to pop up this little MS Paint drawing in the middle here. Nothing too fancy, but I think it'll get my point across. Essentially, as you can see at the top, you have like player 1, player 2, and your board state is going to look something like this. So in the middle, you have your hand, or at the bottom you have your hand. In the middle of the board you have where your lands or your mana generation will be played, and then on top of that you have the actual board where like your creatures and like whatever else ends up in the game, so artifacts, enchantments, whatever kind of things that are tangible on the board, interactable, they go right there. And you start with 20 health is the number that I'm at right now, and obviously numbers and everything like that are subject to change because I haven't really done a lot of the actual card design and balance yet. But yeah, so essentially you have kind of like a Hearthstone setup board, but instead of gaining mana per turn just linearly like in Hearthstone, and you're going to be playing cards that generate mana. But to differentiate it from the way that like Magic works with land cards, the way that you gain mana in my game is borrowing a little bit from Dragon Ball Super, if you've ever played or heard of that card game. And essentially in Dragon Ball Super, you can discard any card from your hand and it will be used as mana from now on. And I didn't play a ton of Dragon Ball Super, so I'm not sure if it ever gets past that amount of complexity where I discard one card, it gets me one mana. But one of the avenues this opens up for like interesting decisions with your mana base is something along the lines of like, let's say I have a card, and it's a 1 mana 1/1, and it's just a 1/1. But if I play it for land, then that was a bad example. I'm gonna redo that. All right, so coming back to the first example of like how complexity can be brought into my system, let's say that like normally I have a hand, right? And I have a card that costs like 1 mana, 2 mana, 3 mana, 4 mana, 8 mana. That 8 mana card is not going to be doing me any good in the early game, right? So I'm going to go ahead and use him as my mana card. And, since he's an 8 mana guy, he's probably a really strong creature. He probably doesn't have any effects for being played as a land. In general, my game focuses on trying to have no spells. It's going to, that initially sounds like it might mean that the game is very linear. It means you play creature 1 will beat up creature 2, and then whoever just has the biggest board will win, right? But I think there's a lot of ways to combat that, and I think that what having only creatures does is it allows for the game to be very accessible. Because one of the issues that I have trying to teach people new card games is they have to have a base level understanding of how card games work to really like dive in and understand how the new game works, right? So like it's very common that you have like, let's use Magic for example. You got land cards, right? That's very core to the game. You have to know how those work. Those are simple enough. You probably can figure those out. You have creature cards. Okay, well those can only be played on your turn. That makes sense. Excluding keywords. Creatures can only be played on your turn. Cool. Very nice, simple, easy rule. Then you have spells. oh, okay, so what makes this spell different than a creature? Does it not summon something? Is it a one-time effect? How's that work? And that gets even more diluted and confusing between like instants and sorceries. And then you have these like side grades that are kind of like creatures because they're permanents, but they're not spells, but they don't count as creatures, and that's like enchantments and stuff like that. So there's a lot to learn if you're learning Magic, right? And I want my game to be fairly easy to, at a base level, understand and be able to get into. Because what really sucks is when you're trying to learn a new game and you're like, I understand that I like this idea, but there's so much going on, and I don't have like a mentor to teach me all this shit. So like, how am I gonna, make that first jump from this is cool to this is something I can like play and start to learn over time? Because no matter how much, like, if you're playing a game like Hearthstone, let's say, when you first start, you're like, okay, cool, I'm learning how to play. I drag my card here. Oh, look, I did that. And it's very simple to see from I've never played. Oh, look, I drag a card out. It does something. Now I at least know how the game functions. And as I play, I will learn what's good, what's bad, how to play. In something like Magic, that system, that very first step between I'm playing the game and I'm doing, like, making my own decisions, is really hard to get people to do and to understand because there's so many different like complex things that they're gonna be overwhelmed. And so I want my game to be as unoverwhelming to a new player as possible while still leaving plenty of room for complexity and actually having a fun and interesting game. So I think that what all that was trying to lead me up to was explaining how mana works. So let's say you have this 8 mana big ass creature. He has great effects as a creature, but he costs 8. So if I'm playing him as mana, I don't want him to have an additional effect that's better than being just like one generic mana, right? So any card you can play down, and as long as it has no land abilities, it'll tap and it generates 1 mana for your turn. Very simple. Any card can do that. There is, eh, in general, there are no cards which will not be able to be played as a land, right? Now, that seems to be where the Dragon Ball Super like card game ends with that complexity, and I think that's kind of boring. I think there's a lot more you can do with that mana system besides I discard, I have 1 mana. Let's take, for example, let's say you have like a 2 mana 2/1, or maybe not 2 mana card is a good example because that'll come out a little bit early. Actually, no, that's fine. Let's use like a 2 mana 2/1, and it has some sort of effect when you play it as a creature. But let's say if you play it as a land, then it actually will tap for 2. But when you play it as a land, you have to bounce another card that you already have as a land. So it's like a bounce land in Magic, except instead of bouncing back a useless mana card just to get the advantage that now you tap for 2 instead of 1. So you get the ramping effect, kind of, but not really. Now, instead of just returning a land card, you've returned a real card to your hand. So, in our example earlier, let's say way early in the game, you played your 8 mana creature as a land, and then you get, along your game, and on like turn 9, you're like, oh hey, I can play this bounce creature as a land, bounce back my 8-drop to my hand, and now I can replay my 8-drop. And so it comes, I think that system of having every creature be able to be played as a land, but some have additional land effects, or they have effects when they hit the battlefield as a land, such as the bounce creature, is really good. And then another very simple example of like an upgrade that you can do in that like system is instead of a bounce land creature, right? You just have like, hey, if you play this as a land, you probably don't want to play it as land. Maybe it's a really good creature. But if you're stuck and you play it as a land, maybe you get an extra life or something. Or maybe every time you tap it, you get a life. Or maybe if you tap it, like every time you tap it, it gets a counter. And when you get like 10 counters, something cool happens. I don't fucking know. I haven't designed many of the cards yet. Most of this is just the actual like holistic picture of what the game will look like, right? And I do think that these like devlog videos will get a lot more interesting as we get into the nitty gritty. Like, hey, I made this card, this card, this card. We balanced this card, that kind of stuff. But in the beginning, you have to have a very good idea of what's going into your game and what is like not achievable is not the right word, but like you don't want to have so many ideas in your initial design that once you start actually implementing things, you're like, oh, well, this idea doesn't work. Oh, this didn't actually end up being as fun as I want. You want a very narrow set of things you're trying to meet. And then you can expand from there. But your base should be very simple. So, at the core, I have a very newbie friendly card game. It only has creatures and it only has lands, but all your lands are creatures. So you don't have any other types of cards, at least to start, right? Then you have 20 life. Number subject to change. You have a life total. When you lose your life total, you die. And then the thing that I think is also going to help separate my card game from other card games, aside from the, I would consider unique and kind of complex and fun mana system, um, is the food system. So as you can see on this little picture, you have your basic game board and your life total, but then on your side, you have these 8 cards, again, number subject to change, 8 cards that you set out at the beginning of the game that come from your deck. Like you don't, they come randomly from your deck. It's the top 8. So you don't choose which cards will be in this pile. It's always random. But you have these certain number of cards set out, and that is your food supply. The entire concept of the game is you are an animal leader, and you need to lead your kingdom to like victory. So what's a kingdom have? It's got like a castle. That's your defense. That's like your, that's, you know, if you lose home base, you die. But you also need food so that like your people can live, right? And really like that's just a flavor thing, but animals need food. So I thought that that made sense, and it lets me implement this mechanic which I'm about to explain. So you have this food supply, and depending on what tribe you are, like what character, what class, whatever you are, there are going to be cards that there's going to be cards and effects that affect your food supply. So let's say you were playing a bunny character, and your bunny rabbit had a creature effect. Like you played a 1-mana 1/1 bunny, and your bunny says, "Hey, on my turn, if I want, I can eat one of my food." And eat means like you draw that card, and now you only have 7 cards in your food supply now, but that card goes to your hand, and I get some sort of effect, or I have to pay for it. It depends on your tribe or the specific card, you know. So there can be benefits and disadvantages to eating your food. But if you lose all your food, you die. But by eating your food, you're getting more resources into your hand, and then this would be more of like a late game mechanic because you want both of your life resource and your food resource to be scarce, right? You don't want it to be super easy to be like, oh, you know, I'm gonna eat 4 food instantly, and then, you know, my next turn I can just play a card that like says get 4 food. Like that's not the point of the mechanic. The point is you have a subset of cards that sometimes can save you in a pinch if you really need to like go for those extra resources, right? Um, and I think that is really interesting. That's something that was in the Dragon Ball Super card game to an effect. They have it tied to your life total. So instead of having like a 20 health total, their entire life system was just based on these 8 cards. Every time you took damage, you drew 1 of them, unless keywords affected, then maybe you drew 2. And if once you hit 0, you die. I think it's a really cool system. I think it's a little bit hard to grasp as a new player, because you don't know exactly how you want to like manage this resource now. Because when your only resource is both card advantage and life, it's really interesting, but it's also kind of difficult to learn. And I think that there's an interesting dynamic between having both, because now that means that my basic creature cards will most likely target your Empire's health. So you have to worry about the board. But let's say you got really greedy or you got really desperate, and so you're at like, you've eaten almost all your food. You have 1 food left. Maybe some cards interact with your opponent's food supply, right? So it'd be really risky to ever go down to 1 food, because if you ever do, then your opponent could play a card that says, hey, when this, you know, enters, or when this deals combat damage to the Empire or something, it also steals food. And that opens up a lot of possibilities for a lot of different cards, I think. So that's kind of where I'm at right now. Essentially, you have all creatures and all lands. You have 2 different types of health that you have to manage. So you have 2 resources, and if you lose either of your resources, you lose the game. So my current plan is to actually put more time and effort into designing the actual like cards in the game, so we can try to start playing it out and balancing it. I have a couple friends who are open to play testing with me. So maybe we'll have some play testing videos, see how that goes, see how design actually gets implemented. But I just wanted to put this out there as kind of like, this is the baseline idea that I'm starting with. These are the principles I'm trying to accomplish with my mechanics. So, I think we have a very good base for an interesting game here. And now it just comes down to designing the cards and balancing the cards. And I would love any feedback because it's very difficult as a designer, especially on something like this project. Like this project, I initially started a year ago, right? And even though I haven't touched it very much, it's always been in the back of my head, and I've always kind of thinking about it. So I'm very invested into this idea, and obviously there's very obvious potential pitfalls. Maybe having two resources is too much. Maybe just not having like a standard life total that's just a little bit too weird and too wonky, and maybe it doesn't work. Um, Maybe there's a reason that, say, Dragon Ball Super only used the food supply as their health and didn't have a separate health bar. Maybe just only creatures as my basis of my game is not a good idea. Maybe that in practice that just doesn't work. Um, but yeah, those are all interesting things that will probably come up as we design the game. And I think it'll be really fun to try to work within not the constraints that I've put myself into, but you know, I think constraints has a bad negative connotation. It's like, oh, I can't do this because of this rule. But like these are the rules that I'm setting myself. There's reasons behind why I want these and why I think these are the best solutions to my problem. My problem is I want an accessible card game that still has pretty decent like complexity as you get better and better, but it's very simple at the base for people to understand. And I am very confident in this idea. So, I would love any feedback. Thank you to the people who have been commenting on the old video saying they really wanted updates. It's really supportive. Um, Honestly, like those are the reason that you make videos, right? I got a couple comments saying like, "Hey man, I've been working on my own card games for a couple of years. I ended up meeting someone through my old comment section. We sat for like an hour and a half, 2 hours a couple months ago, and just went through his card game, and I gave him feedback on what I thought was wrong. It's really just a very interesting space for me, and so I'm really happy that there's others out there that are interested in my opinion. Because I was very happy with the last video discussing mana systems, and it got a lot of positive feedback. So thank you to everyone who wanted an update on my game. Sorry that there's really not that much to say. We haven't done too much, as of late, but I'm very confident in my idea, and I'm very excited to keep trying to move forward with it. So if you would like to see, the sort of dev vlogs and like play testing videos and stuff like that, please let me know. And yeah, thank you guys for watching. Hit me with any comments, any questions, anything like that. And thanks. Have a good one.